For this video, I'm going to be talking about Flask. Flask is a lightweight micro web framework written in Python. It's used to build web applications. I'll be guiding you through a project you can complete if you have Visual Studio Code or some kind of text editor installed on your computer, along with having Python and Flask installed on your terminal, which I'll go through later in this video. For this project, we'll be building a simple notes application. The goal is to create an application where we can submit notes, and after submitting, you can see your completed note. Along with that feature, we will also be able to delete any of the notes that we create with the click of a button. Instead of writing the code during the video, to save time, I'll have it already complete and explained because each file is dependent on other files. I'll run a quick demo right now so you get to see the application live. So the application was already running, so I'll go ahead and do a Control-C to exit out, and then to run the application I'm going to do Control-Option-N, hotkey for Mac to run it. And after running it, you're going to see a hyperlink that looks like this. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And this is my Flask application. It says My Notes. There's a place where you can write a note. I'll just write test1, edit test2, test3, and then you can delete them you can delete out of order, and then delete the rest, and that's it. I'll go ahead and exit the application. So first let's ensure that we have the correct packages installed. In your terminal, you want to run this command to ensure that you have Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy. So if you do a pip install Flask SQL Alchemy, for me it's already going to say requirements already satisfied, but for you, if you don't have this, then it'll go ahead and install the appropriate packages. Before I explain the code in our files, I want to emphasize the importance of structuring our files, meaning where we should be saving each file. So if you look on the left, you can see each file and the folders that they're in. So the overall folder is called Flask Notes right here. And in Flask Notes, I have my main.py file. And then in a folder called Website, I have init.py, models.py, routes.py, which are all these files right here that we're going to go over. And then in the templates folder, I have home.html, which is our HTML file. First, let's go over the main.py file. So right here. Now I'm going to go back and forth a lot between these 5 files, just to show you how each file is importing certain functions from each other. So in the first line, from website import create app, this imports the create app function from a folder or module called website. Now, like I mentioned before, we need to ensure that these files are in the appropriate file or under the appropriate folder. So this folder is a website, so it's pulling from the website folder. So if I go to the init.py file right here we see the create app function, which we'll go into more detail later, which is the application factory function that creates, configures, and returns the app. And the reason why we're importing it from website is because it's in the website folder. In the second line, app equals create app. Again, create app is the factory function that builds and returns a Flask app object with routes, configurations, and blueprints already set up. This line just calls the function and creates the app instance. We will discuss the details of that function later in this video. This line, if name equals main app.run debug equals true. This line checks if you're running the script directly and not importing it as a module somewhere else. App.run starts a development server. Debug equals true means that the server will auto reload if you make any changes. You'll see detailed messages if anything goes wrong. So when I ran the function right here in the terminal, you can see as I created each note, it came up here, get and post, which I'll describe later. And then as I deleted each node, you can see the get request completed after deleting each node. Now let's go to our init.py file. This file is where the Flask application is created and configured, sets up the database and security, registers routes and functionality using blueprints, and make sure your app is modular, clean, and scalable. So in the first line, from Flask, import Flask. This imports the Flask class, which you'll use to create your web application. From Flask SQL Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy. This imports the SQL Alchemy object, which helps us interact with databases using Python classes instead of raw SQL. And then from OS, import path. This allows checking whether a file exists, and it's used when creating the database file. DB equals SQL Alchemy. This initializes the DB object globally, so it can be used across your app. DB name equals notes.db. This is the name of your SQLite database file. Now let's get into the create app function. App equals Flask name. This creates an instance of the Flask web application. Name tells Flask where to find your code and static files. If you're running the script directly, name will be main, as mentioned in the previous file. App.config secret key is equal to dev key is the secret key that protects your session data and cookies from being tampered with. It's used for securely signing session cookies and other security related needs. App.config SQL Alchemy database URI is equal to fstring SQLite DB name. This sets up the database URI. It tells SQL Alchemy to use SQLite and save the database file to notes.db. db.initApp. This links the DB object to this specific app instance. From routes, import routes. When you see a period before a file, that means it's pulling from the routes file that we created, and it's importing routes from that file. I'll explain when we get to the routes file. App.register blueprint. A blueprint is a way to organize your routes and views into different files. The blueprint system helps break up a large app into modular, reusable components. With app.app context, from .models import note db.createAll. So you import your data models here, so SQL Alchemy knows about them when creating the database. The createAll method creates all tables defined in your models. Now let's go to our routes.py file. This file is also named views.py. So if you see different Flask applications, you can see there's a variation between these files being called routes and views. This file defines the routes or URLs and view functions, basically how your app responds to different web page requests. In Flask, when someone visits a URL like / Flask looks for a function decorated with @app.root/. So in our case, it's right here. This is our route decorator with /. These view functions return HTML pages, redirects, or JSON responses. So in this first line, from Flask import blueprint, render template, request, redirect. So blueprint allows you to separate different parts of your Flask app into reusable modules. In this case, it defines a set of routes. Render template is used to render HTML files from a folder called templates. Request gives access to form data submitted by the user. And redirect sends the user to another route after an action. From .models import note, this is a line that we used previously. This is a model that represents a row in the notes table. This will become more clear when we see the models.py file. And then from .import db, it imports the SQL Alchemy db object, which is your SQL Alchemy connection instance that was initialized in init.py. Routes equals blueprint routes and name as parameter values. This creates a blueprint object named routes. It groups a set of views or routes which will be registered in your app through a create app in init.py. Routes.route methods equals get post. This is a route decorator. It tells Flask that this function should be triggered when the user visits the root URL / of the web app. This route handles both get and post requests. A get request is when a user visits the page, and a post request is when a form is submitted. Like you had seen in when we had added the note, the button, that's a post request. So first function is home. It defines a view function called home. This is what gets called when a user accesses /. And then if request.method equals post begins the if condition for when a user posts a new note. Note content is equal to request.form.get note. It gets the value from a form input field named note from the HTML file. So this note has to match the note name in home.html, which I'll go over real quick. Right here, this has to match what's in here. But I'll explain that later in home.html. New note equals note, and then the parameter content equals note content. So it creates a new note object derived from models.py. So in models.py, we see content is one of the values as a column, and content is being assigned note content right here. db.session.add new note, db.session.commit. These two lines save the note to the database. And then after that, we're going to just redirect back to our home page. And then so this is for if a user commits a post request, which is submitting the note to the server. So all notes, and then after that, it's going to be all notes equals note.query.all, and it gets all notes from the database. After that, we're going to return render template, home.html, and notes is equal to all notes. So again, that's a variable that we're passing in to this HTML document. And that'll reveal all the notes that we pass in. So the HTML file contains dynamic content using Jinja, the templating engine that Flask uses. And yeah, I'll go more in depth in that when we get to home.html. The next route here is routes.route delete note int id. This route is triggered when the user goes to delete note / whatever integer. It could be 5, for example. So int id captures an integer from the URL and passes it to the function. So we get to this function called delete note. Note equals note.query.getID. It retrieves the note with that ID that was passed in. db.session.delete note and db.session.commit just deletes the note from the database. And then we're going to redirect back to the home page after that. So this function is only committed if the user is sent to this URL, delete note, and whatever the integer is passed in. Now let's go to models.py. This is where you define the data models for your Flask app using SQL Alchemy. Models represent the tables in your database. SQL Alchemy is the most commonly used object relational mapper, or ORM, in Python. It lets you interact with a database like SQLite, PostgreSQL, or MySQL using Python classes instead of raw SQL. Again, this line right here, from.importDB, this line was used in routes.py, which imports the SQL Alchemy DB object, which is your SQL Alchemy connection instance that was initialized in init.py. Class note takes in the parameter db.model. This defines a new table called note. db.model tells SQL Alchemy that this class maps to a table. id is equal to db.column, and it takes in two parameters, db.integer and primary key equals true. So this is the primary key for each node, and it's auto incremented by default. So it goes 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And it defines the column integer, or column ID, as an integer. Next, we have the next column. Content is equal to db.column with the parameter db.string1000. It defines a column content to store the text of the note, and it's limited to 1000 characters. Now let's go to home.html. This file is an HTML template used in a Flask application to display and manage notes. This file uses the Jinja 2 templating for dynamic content and Bootstrap 5 for styling. So Jinja allows us to use Python code in HTML in Bootstrap allows us to use customized CSS so we don't have to make it ourselves. So in the first line, doc type HTML declares the document type. This tells the browser it's an HTML5 document. HTML lang en opens the HTML tag and sets the document language to English. Then we get to the metadata right here. In title, we set the title of the browser tab to Flask Notes, and we use this link. It links to the Bootstrap 5 CDN for pre-built CSS styling, and this gives your page modern, responsive styles without having to write your own CSS. Body class equals P5, adds padding P5 around the whole body for spacing. Div class container centers the content with appropriate margins and width using Bootstrap's container class. Form method equals post, sends the data via post to the same route / when submitted. So in here, text area, name equals note, and so forth. This is a multi-line text input. So when you saw the demonstration, this is where you saw the place where you can write a note. So the name, like I mentioned before, the name equals note attribute is important because it tells Flask what to look for in request.form.get note. So right here, request.form.get note. So this note, that note has to match what's right here. And then right below that, we can add the button. So we add the button, type is submit, and the text right here is add note. So that's what shows up when we're able to click that button to add that note and submit that post request. And then UL class an unordered list right here. So right here, class equals list group MT4 creates a style list with Bootstrap spacing. MT4 equals margin top 4. And then we see what looks like Python code. So it says for note in notes, but it's surrounded by a % with curly brackets. And so this is how you would write Python code in HTML using that Jinja 2 templating. So this starts a loop over the notes list passed from Flask to the template. And so we can go to routes.py to show the render template. So right here, render template home.html, notes is equal to all notes. So all notes was queried, all of them right here. And so that is what we're looping over right here, the notes. And so we're looping over that, and we want to display the content of each note. So for note in notes, and note.content right here in double curly brackets is able to accomplish that. And this line right here, just this class, it's a flexbox layout for spacing content and aligns it vertically. And then the note.content, it displays each note. But with each note, we added this delete note link, and that is what maps to the delete note function in routes. So delete -note /int ID right there. And that's what's being replicated right there. And then that is going to be whatever integer note that that's assigned to. So it could be the first one, it could be the second one, but it'll create a number right there, and then it'll delete whatever note is assigned to that ID. And then this is just a delete button right here. So as you can see, and that ends the HTML file. As you can see, the files all depend on one another, and it's extremely important to understand where to save them, what files that they're under, and you just run the file when you're in the main.py file. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.